Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second season of the Traveling Métis podcast, the podcast that dives headfirst into Métis culture. I am your host, Samantha Loney. We're back with a bunch of great guests, so pop in your headphones, grab your paddle, and hop into that canoe. We're about to head down the river to visit with my fellow Métis. Scratch that fellow Métis part. Today we have another token white guest. Why do I keep putting white people on this podcast? Some of them are special. Deep down in the colonial shithole we live in, we find a few gems among the turds. What is so special about today's guest is their use of the two-eyed seeing approach, something that defines us as Métis people. For those of you who need a refresher on two-eyed seeing, Nika Bazook said it best last season.
Probably the most important thing about being a Métis person is that we look at everything from two sides. Two-eyed seeing makes it so that we know that it's not black and white. We know that it's not yes or no, and that it's not so clear of an answer, and that there's always going to be that gray, and we kind of almost look for that gray.
Today on the show, we have Taylor Manser, a consultation advisor at the MNO's Lands, Resources, and Consultation branch. I'm going to let Taylor dive into what the heck that is later, but the basic gist is, after years of no one giving a shit, people have decided, hey, maybe we should consult the Indigenous peoples whose land we're on. You know, if we're going to potentially poison their water or kill the land they use to feed themselves. It's been a long time coming, but these positions at the MNO are extremely important. But more important than having these roles are the people we find to fill them. There is a lot going on in Ontario when it comes to the environment, from the controversial nuclear waste storage to freaking bats dying. But I could not have picked a better person to ease my concerns or make me feel heard as an Indigenous person than Region 7's consultation advisor, Taylor Manser. Again, Taylor is a white person, but a white person who understands the importance of two-eyed seeing. I wanted to learn how and why this two-eyed seeing approach became so important to them in their work. So you work for the Land Resource Consultation department. So how did you get involved with the MNO, and how did you get involved in that position?
I graduated from Wilfrid Laurier University in environmental sciences in the summer of 2022. And so after that, I really wanted to try to find an organization that I could really get into with Indigenous peoples and working with environmental conservation and just using kind of a two-eyed seeing approach. So in my final year, I did an honors thesis researching with an Indigenous scholar named Miguel Sui, and he really inspired me to want to work with more Indigenous people and learn from Indigenous people. So I was able to do my thesis, which was the Kitchener-Waterloo Attawandaron Placemaking Initiative, using a two-eyed seeing approach to decolonization and reconciliation in urban planning. So a bit of a mouthful, but basically what we did was we were doing research on the Attawandaron peoples that lived in Kitchener-Waterloo before they were kind of decimated by, they were completely decimated by, Europeans coming over and the contact with that. And so we really just looked at a public park that was going to be converted into a Indigenous placemaking initiative where we would be able to have Indigenous art installments, a public garden. The location that we chose had a river flowing through it, and just all of the different elements that a placemaking initiative needs, because we found that Indigenous peoples, at least in that part of Southern Ontario, didn't feel seen or recognized within their communities. And so this was kind of a way to have both Indigenous and Western knowledge put together for complex problems. And so after that, I just started looking at different Indigenous organizations, and I originally applied for the advisor role, but because I was fresh out of school, I was just like way out of my bounds. But we reached for the stars, and so they reached out and asked if I wanted to start as a coordinator. So I actually started at the MNO as a consultation coordinator for Region 7, and then through my hard work, I got a promotion into a consultation advisor, and so I'm just super grateful for the opportunity to even work for the Métis Nation of Ontario, and I love my job, so it's super exciting to be able to talk about it today.
Definitely think we need a lot of allies, because obviously it's not just going to take Indigenous people to fix the land.
No, 100%, and that's something that I completely stand by. I think there's actually a responsibility of Canadians who were born and raised here and have the privilege of not having the sacrifices that Indigenous people have had to make, and the trauma that Indigenous people in Ontario have had to go through, and all of Canada. And so I would love to be a part of that solution. I think that it shouldn't be on Indigenous peoples to fix these problems. It should be on, the people who have benefited the most, aka myself, right? Just being able to even go to post-secondary education and being able to go and get my degree, I found was just such a privilege. And so it's about using that knowledge to create some changes, because it's definitely a time in Ontario, I think. We need an update on what we're doing. There's just so much going on, and Indigenous people need that support.
What does your job at the LRC entail?
The main part of the Lands, Resources and Consultations branch is all about the duty to consult. So within the government, we have this adherence that we have to the three different groups of Indigenous peoples in Canada, so the Métis, First Nations, and Inuit. And so all of our main huge projects that go on, thinking like nuclear, mining, logging, all of those projects we have consultation on. So ensuring that those different proponents and those different companies, whether it's on any field of anything land, we basically consult to make sure that they're adhering to that duty to consult, and that they are ensuring that Indigenous peoples have a say in what's going on and are heard. But for my main day-to-day job, I work on the Nuclear Waste Management Organization file. So there's a huge project going on, it's just the proposal for a project, which is the Deep Geologic Repository for used nuclear waste. And this is at the higher radiative level. There are some proposals for lower level radiation and things like that, but this is for all of Canada's used nuclear waste to be going to. So it started as a petition all across Canada to see what provinces would be interested in having it. And obviously Ontario has a huge nuclear industry as it is, so it just made most sense for Ontario to kind of be that province. And then I believe that there was 7 or 8 different people that kind of put their hands up, different communities that said, yes, we'd be willing to have this deep geologic repository put in our community. And then from there, they did a lot of research on the ground rock that's in there, and looked for the best Canadian shield that we could find to find the most airtight rock that would have no water, no seeping, anything like that. So that's where a lot of my activities on a day-to-day basis come from, is the consultation with that project. So the Deep Geologic Repository cannot be put in a community that is not a willing host, because right now all of the nuclear waste is on the surface at the facilities. So it's not being transported a lot, but there are some movement of the fuel, but at the moment they're really trying to find a place for a long-term solution for the fuel. There's a lot that goes into that. Unfortunately, the history of nuclear has not been very kind to Indigenous peoples, and it basically was just colonization all over again, of this is where we're putting it and everyone has to deal with that. And so with the Deep Geologic Repository, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization really has to have that foundation of a willing host, and they have to have Indigenous acceptance of the program. And not just Indigenous acceptance, also municipality acceptance, all of the people that are going to be near that facility.
What are the different aspects to your job?
The main components are community engagement, field research, advise and consultation between the Georgian Bay Traditional Territory Consultation Committee and the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, and of course adhering to the duty to consult. So all summer I was driving around Region 7 collecting data for the Native Bat Conservation Program, which is a program that's funded by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. We also did a field research TKLU through the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, and we had multiple community engagements. Last year, the Nuclear Safety Open House was a really huge success, which was where I basically was just trying to have everyone from the nuclear sector in one room at one time, which, if you can believe, had never happened before. So we're talking like the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission had never been in the same room with all of the other nuclear proponents at the same time, which was crazy because I'm like, how have you all not already had this engagement of being able to just speak one-on-one with citizens? And these people are so well educated and so well spoken that being able to have those one-on-one conversations about, something that isn't so well known was really important, because I think the main thing that, in my opinion, I've seen through my work is that when people learn about the project and everything that's gone into it, they're much more accepting of it. It's people that really don't want to listen and are just completely anti-nuclear, which that's completely okay to have that opinion if that's the way that you want to go. But I just found through the education that people have gone through, the acceptance is so much more high. Like, we're seeing it within certain conversations, I could see it with my own eyes, people that are like, oh, I never really thought about that. And in my own personal experience, I've asked questions, and every single time I've asked a question, there's 3 studies, 4 decades of research, like just a crazy amount of research put into this project. So I feel really confident in it because I know I'm not as smart as a nuclear scientist or an environmental scientist that's out there doing that groundwork. And so it was really great to have an event that they could come and explain what they do and explain to citizens what the project actually is. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there on nuclear. And I think Ontarians in general don't realize that 60% of their energy is coming from nuclear. So when you're turning the lights on, you're using that energy, but then you don't care about where the nuclear waste is going, right? So that's the conversation that we're having, and that's one of the main parts that I love about my job and about being at the Lands, Resources and Consultations branch, is that one-on-one conversation that I get to have with citizens at these events, conversations through emails, whether it's good or bad. Like, I have had many conversations with people who are completely against the Deep Geologic Repository. They say if it gets put in South Bruce, they'll move. And that's fine. Like, I want to have conversations with those people, right? Like, that's one of the main things I find with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Obviously, I'm a Métis Nation of Ontario employee, but one thing that I've just seen through their work is that they really want to have conversations with every single person.
For me, whenever I go to those events, I'm just like, well, we already have the waste. So it's like, what do we do have to, even if you don't like it, you do have to think of where are we going to put this, because we already have it.
And that's a huge part of the conversation that I think people miss. It's like, this isn't if we have nuclear waste, where we're going to put it. This is we have a lot of nuclear waste sitting on the surface, and that in itself has risks that I think people don't even want to hear or listen to, right? Because it's what's been happening. And I've been able to go to these nuclear facilities and walk through and see it for myself, and it's completely safe. But at the end of the day, long term is what we're looking at. Like, we need a long-term solution for this waste. And so we aren't the first country to build a deep geologic repository either. That's something that I think a lot of people don't know as well. It's like, well, we didn't come up with this idea all on our own. Actually, we were able to send the Georgian Bay Traditional Territory Consultation Committee to Finland this year to see their deep geologic repository, because they are in the process of building it and using it. And the rock that they use is a lot less dry than our rock here. So it's just such a confidence boost in the sense of other countries are doing this. Other countries have done the research as well. And the nuclear sector is on an international board of safety. It's a little bit different than mining or logging in Canada, where that's a bit more of a private industry where, random companies can come and purchase forestry and mining permits and do what they want. Whereas all of the nuclear, whether it's nuclear waste or nuclear energy, they all have an international board of nuclear safety that they have to adhere to. So it's so regulated, that even if there is any sort of slip up, it's found before it's a huge catastrophic event. But, I totally understand people's fear with the past history that they look at, and I think a lot of Indigenous peoples, some of them that aren't so willing, say, well, the government will just put it where they want anyways. Mm. And that's a huge fear, right? And so I think the Nuclear Waste Management Organization was created to kind of divert that from happening. This isn't a project that's going to impact our generation. It's going to impact 7 generations down the line, which is how a lot of Indigenous people think. So it's kind of nice that this organization is in place to kind of make sure that history doesn't repeat itself in that sense, which I think is really important.
We've all seen Oppenheimer and things like that, where it was on native land, and maybe back then they didn't consult with people. They kind of just did whatever they wanted to.
And, nuclear in Canada isn't getting smaller, so I think that with that, everyone has realized we really need to take a different approach to this. Every single nuclear industry proponent that I have worked with or seen has had to engage with Indigenous people, which is a lot different than the past, obviously. But Indigenous peoples are stewards of the land. They have this ancestral knowledge that's previous generations of this really important knowledge that I think gets lost a lot of times. And the nuclear industry is stepping back and realizing, okay, this is obviously a Western science. Indigenous peoples did not use nuclear energy. So how can we, obviously acknowledge the past and the history that's happened and create change for the future? Nuclear is going to be around for a long time, whether it's in the form of waste or an operating whole, nuclear facility. And so they have to incorporate Indigenous peoples in that, because Indigenous peoples were here before the nuclear industry. Indigenous peoples will be here after the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry can't do it without Indigenous peoples, but I think they've also learned so much resiliency from Indigenous peoples because they listen, they sit back, and they understand we use this energy. This isn't something that we've created, but it's something that our future generations will have to deal with, regardless of whether we want it or not. And so it's not this acceptance of the project in the sense of, oh, well, we'll just go with whatever they want so that we can get the most for our communities now. It's how can we look at this project in this 7-generation sense of, the pros and cons of it going in, because with any decision you make, there's going to be pros and cons. And so I think having Indigenous people have a say in that, as stewards of the land, you're only going to have a good decision for everyone. But, one of the biggest things that I learned about Indigenous culture is the one health perspective of the land, the animals, and the people are all one health. If something's out of whack and something's sick, it's going to impact the health and integrity of everything. And that's inclusive in nuclear waste and nuclear energy. They see it, they use it, they understand it, and then they're accepting of, okay, we do need to do something about this. So Indigenous peoples are the forefront runners of forward thinking, because they're always thinking about future generations, and that's something that the Western culture completely misses. That's, at least in my opinion, I find, we don't think 7 generations ahead. We think, how can we make the most money right now and get the most out of this exact moment? Whereas Indigenous peoples are always constantly thinking forward. It's always interesting because when I talk about my job, people always think Indigenous people and nuclear? How does that mix? It doesn't. And it's true, but that's kind of where my job comes in. I'm kind of that in-between of, I'm not going to tell any Indigenous person what is right or wrong with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization or any of the decisions that are made with the Deep Geologic Repository. My job is simply to listen, learn, respect, and bring what I've learned to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization.
Since Native people know the land, it's, okay, where would it best be to put this nuclear waste that has the least impact on our daily lives? Being able to speak with Indigenous peoples who have that ancestral knowledge, that needs to be compensated for, because that is such a important thing that we don't have, that we need to build in and add into these projects, whether it's nuclear or not, any project, honestly. Yeah. I personally wish the logging and mining industry had the same kind of safety regulations and forward thinking that nuclear had, but I just find it so interesting how little people know in Ontario about nuclear, when it's really
being used so much for all of our energy and is only going to be continued for the government, their goal of being neutral by 2050 and all these changes that they're making.
So since you were talking about educating other people on like nuclear and things like that, is there anything since coming to this job that you've maybe learned about?
I think the main thing that I've learned through my job is how much our landscape is changing. There's so much development going on, whether it's housing, infrastructure. There's just so much change to the land that I, as a Western person, never noticed, because in growing up in Barrie, it exploded, and there was just always construction and always expansion, and I never thought about it in the sense of how is this changing the land. And when I got this job and I had these conversations with Indigenous peoples, I really started to realize over all of these different projects, not even really exclusive to the DGR, is that the access to land for Indigenous peoples, specifically Métis people, is dwindling. Because Métis people don't have a reserve to harvest from, and so they have to use Crown land. But Crown land is constantly changing and evolving and being sold and moving, and different people have rights to it. And in all of that, specifically access to water has really been diminished for Métis people and being able to harvest and share those traditions that their ancestors had taught them for their next generation. So the main environmental concern that I have comes from Indigenous people's access to land and water, specifically Métis people, because they don't have that set reserve land to know, like, yes, I will be able to harvest here, I will be able to, go back to this blueberry bush. Métis people are coming out to these areas and there's huge barricades and do not cross, do not come and intrude. Like, how could you tell Indigenous peoples who are using their ancestral land for harvesting that they're intruding? And Métis people's talking about how they're being shouted at and told, you can't hunt here. There's people walking through here, and it's like, well, where are they supposed to go, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess that's the main environmental concern that I've learned, is just how fast Ontario is expanding, and specifically Southern Ontario, something that, I always think about in my job when we're talking about different proponents with different huge projects, is how will this impact Métis people's right to harvest? And Métis people are raising those red flags of, like, we are losing land and water to harvest from. So what does that say for the integrity of and the health of the land? If we're going to completely use all of it for development and housing, people need green space. Like, that's something that, whether you're Indigenous or not, I think people need those spaces to be able to go out and enjoy nature. And whether you're harvesting or not, or just going out to clear your head, if we keep expanding the way that we aren't going to have those spaces, and we aren't going to have those connections. And as I had brought up before, the One Health perspective of just once one of those things goes, everything else is impacted.
Luckily, Ford stopped with everything on the green belt. Yep. But like we saw that whole conversation there where it's like, oh, let's just put the housing here. And it's like, well, there's land here that, it's home to not just people. Like, we talk about, our right to, like, harvest and stuff, but it's like there's animals that live there.
I don't think a lot of people realize animals need connected lands. Like, you can't have, like, a green spot over here and then a little patch over here. Like, they need a good, decent amount of land to connect and migrate and do their natural thing that the environment is created for them to do. And so, parks and protected areas in Canada is a huge thing that's going on. And that's my main concern that I've learned through my job, is just we need more people on nature's side. And that's what Indigenous people are every single time. Like, they think the health and well-being of the forest and of the water is the health and well-being of my family. Right? And we miss that in Western culture, 1,000%. And so with my research in two-eyed seeing, I bring that approach to my day-to-day life, and I encourage every single person that I meet to do that as well. And the biggest thing I learned through my degree was that if you care anything at all about conservation and land protection, you should work with Indigenous peoples.
And I always think when you are able to have these discussions, like different perspectives, like open your mind to so many more options. So I think it's like great to have people from all backgrounds and cultures like collaborating on these things, just to, even like you said, like over in Finland, like you took a trip to be like, hey, what are you guys doing over here? Let's learn from you.
That's tricky. There is no blueprint. There is no, this is the path we take and this is how you do it correctly. So I think the way that we've been doing it is great, of just like not taking it slow, but not rushing the process of like, we need to put this DGR in, we have to do this within like a 5-year span. Like it's a huge project that will have implications for hundreds of years. So they're really trying to slow down and take that into account. I feel like when the average Ontarian thinks of nuclear, they think like The Simpsons.
Not every use of nuclear leads to Chernobyl. Like we have been using nuclear for so long, like it's not always we always go to the worst case scenario, I think. So it's, yeah, the more you educate, because since we have this knowledge of this like fear-based, narrative around nuclear, I think like it's, well, your job's even harder to try to be like, hey, like we know that you're aware of these things that have happened, and yes, these things can happen, but it's not always the case. So I think your job's very difficult to break past those fears.
We are dealing with people's trauma, and that's totally valid. Like people having a fear in nuclear is completely valid, and I always validate that. Whether they're angry, concerned, fearful, or whether it's the other side of that, of like, we are getting away from coal, we're getting away from using those really harmful fossil fuels and we're gaining more energy, because let's be realistic, Canada's growing. The population and demand for energy is only going to increase. It's never going to decrease. And so how can we meet that demand in a way that's safe for the environment and for people? We want the air to stay clean. We want to be able to enjoy and swim in our lakes and in our water. But if we have to resort to fossil fuels to do that, we won't be able to enjoy it. I am not the kind of person who pushes things onto people. I will never leave a conversation saying, I'm going to change your opinion. I just give people the facts, and I just give people the time to digest what they learn. And that was the biggest thing that I saw at the Nuclear Safety Open House. People were really, their minds were being opened to this idea of like, oh wow, this is a huge infrastructure that's in Ontario that has been going on for decades that I knew nothing about. I didn't know that's what happened when I turned the lights on, and that's where the energy's coming from. Of course, it's not 100%, but it's set to increase. And so I think with that increase, more Ontarians need to learn about nuclear and all about how we can make nuclear safe for everyone, including Indigenous peoples.
The society we've built, like we realize it's not working, so it's a lot of like unlearning. So unlearning those negative things about nuclear energy and things like that. So I think, yeah, we're just in an era of unlearning the things that have made our society so horrible.
Because that's what I see on a day-to-day basis, is people unlearning that fear-mongering thing that's been instilled in all of us. And this is brand new. This is fresh. Like, this is all happening so fast, in a sense, like nuclear industry in Canada. And it's been over decades, but when you look at how much energy is being created and the future of, isotopes and small nuclear reactors, and there's so many different facets of nuclear that are being created that it's exciting to see. And as someone who has taken the time to sit down and learn and look at the facts, I can confidently say, like, I completely support the nuclear industry, because I know and recognize that they're trying their best to create a solution to a really big problem, which is how do we create enough energy for everyone in a safe and sustainable way.
Yeah, let's move on to maybe something else people are afraid of. Bats.
Like nuclear and bats both just have such a bad rep.
When you look at them up close, they're pretty cute, because there is this bat project that you're working on.
A part of my job is finding citizens that want to volunteer for the program. Last year, I believe we had 18. This year, we upped it to 22. And so we're obviously, as more citizens are wanting to become involved, hoping to increase that as well. So basically, it is 5-day research period, 5 days, 4 nights, where the citizen will get the Wanna-Bat monitor and will put it up in their property wherever they think they'll have the best results. So obviously away from anything that'll create a lot of noise, as the Wanna-Bat monitor is a acoustic monitor that picks up the calls of bats. So fun fact, bats use echolocation to eat. So they are constantly sending out little calls and communicating with different bats, and there's different calls for all sorts of different things. The main thing that we're hearing and listening for is the calls that they send out to look for their food. So I feel like a lot of people have this misconception of bats, that they're like this rodent-type flying animal, and they're actually really far away from that. Like they're more closely linked and related to dolphins and whales who use echolocation. Essentially, we send the citizens out with the monitor. They put the monitor up on their property for 4 nights, and that's when we capture the bat activity. So we collect it all on an SD card. It'll just be hundreds of bat calls sometimes. If there's a roost, there's like thousands of bats that you can pick up in a call within the 4 different nights. So the Toronto Zoo scientists create a bat report that's sent to each of the citizens as well, so that they're involved in the program and get to see the bat activity within their own backyard, which is really cool. So we collected data for 5 months across Region 7, which would be, Huntsville, Moon River area, Midland, Georgian Bay area, Barrie South Simcoe area, and then the Owen Sound, Great Lakes Métis area. And so it's all being compiled basically to create baseline data for the bats. There's 8 bat species in Ontario, endangered, non-endangered, and potentially endangered as of 2023. So the following endangered are tricolored bats, eastern small-footed myotis bats, northern myotis bats, and little brown myotis bats. Non-endangered are the big brown bat, and potentially endangered as of 2023 is the eastern red bat, hoary bat, and silver-haired bat. And one of the main reasons why research is really important for these species is that white nose syndrome completely decimated bat species in Ontario. That's a huge reason why a lot of these are endangered. And white nose syndrome is a fungus that came from the caves of New York. There was a tourist there who went into the cave with his boots and then came home and went into an area or a cave or a hike with his boots that carried the fungus. And so the fungus just went crazy. And I mean, bats roost with thousands and thousands of bats, so it just spread like wildfire. And so white nose syndrome isn't the only thing impacting bats, but we're trying to learn what is impacting bats the most. Climate change, wind turbines, habitat loss. These are all things that, could have really potential impacts and that we're trying to further understand. But the white nose syndrome was something that Ontario saw, and now unfortunately BC is seeing. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of BC conservation scientists are asking, well, what did you do? What do you know? Right? How can we plan for this? So it's really great to have a baseline research to understand what bats are where, how many bats. Of course, with the acoustic monitor, it's hard to say if it's the same bat flying around 80 times in a night, or if it's 80 different bats flying around the monitor once. But we can definitely determine roosts and high bat areas based on the amount of calls. So every backyard has bats. Sorry to tell you. Sorry if you don't like bats, but your backyard has had a bat flying around, whether you are in an apartment building or not.
I was going to say, I live in an apartment building and I park underground, and I've seen, a bat or two just hanging out, like in the morning.
Bat boxes are a really great thing to have for bats, but it's very interesting because if you only have one bat box, they're less likely to show up because they like to move. They like to go from one bat box to the other. They're very picky in where they want to rest.
Well, maybe you want to describe like the bat boxes. So are these just like where the bats could come hang out, or what? What's the significance of them, and why are they using them?
If anyone is interested, they can go onto the Toronto Zoo's website, and they actually have a bat conservation guide. And in this bat conservation guide, they actually have full plans for bat boxes. So essentially, they are a box that has little chambers in it so that the bats can hang vertically. So bats everybody knows the iconic, Dracula, like you're upside down, like hanging, but they like to have nice, neat little tight spaces to just kind of sleep and get warm. So there's single chamber bat houses, and there's double and 4-chamber. There's all sorts of stuff, but essentially it's just wood that is cut into different pieces and then screwed together to create little chambers for the bats to sleep in. You don't have to clean them, you don't have to touch them, nothing like that. The biggest suggestion is just to have multiple of them. Something that's important to know is when the best time to install a bat box is. So the Toronto Zoo says that bat boxes should be installed in March or early April so that female bats have a safe, warm shelter before giving birth in May or June. And bats can live a really long time. Like bats, we have caught bats that are over 40 years old. Which is crazy. For such a small animal, you think 40 years old? Yeah. It's lived double my life. Like it's crazy. I mean, a huge part about bats is habitat loss. So, with like we were talking about before, how much Ontario is developing and changing, and the landscape is just being developed so quickly, how easily a creature like this would be missed. It's tough to make people want to care about a bat, yeah. Right? It's actually easier to have the conversation on nuclear because I feel like people get a benefit out of nuclear, whereas bats, they don't see the benefit. They just see it as like a pest. But there are definitely benefits to having this animal around, and I mean, we've already changed the landscape of Ontario so much. And I think it's important to protect these species that have been here for, again, generations and generations before we were. And how can we acknowledge what they do for our communities and what they do for our environment, and protect that. That's the main goal of the project, to get citizens involved in the protection and conservation of the bats. And just understanding what's in your backyard. Yeah. I mean, there's people that had no idea that they had full-blown bat roosts. Or if people have a backyard with very little to no bat activity, that tells us something. Mm-hmm. Okay, why are they avoiding areas like that? I mean, you don't just have to put up a bat box. I would say the biggest thing to help bats is to educate yourself and others on learning all of those scary characteristics, and really understanding, how is the environment around us changing? I feel like not enough people ask that question, or even think in that context of, if we're doing this project here now and we're, getting all of these species out of this environment, how's that going to change in the next 10 years? What are we going to have? What are we going to see? So I think projects like this, where you're creating a baseline of research, are really, really important, because we can look and see, okay, after all of this development, how have the bats been impacted? What measures do we need to take to be able to protect them more, or to increase populations and things like that? It's not exactly clear cut with bats what's best for them, because we don't know enough about the species. So this program really helps contribute to the knowledge and understanding of bats.
Anything that is happening in your department here at the MNO? Like, how do they get involved in contact or anything like that?
They can definitely reach out to me. My email is just taylorm@metisnation.org. Or we have a communications team that does a really great job of getting our information out there. There's constantly projects and programs going on in LRC, not just the BAT program, but so many different surveys, traditional knowledge, land use studies, different things that citizens can get involved in. If you are a Region 7 citizen that wants to get involved, ensure that you are on the Métis Nation of Ontario's email list. We send out invitations to programs and events all the time through that list. Definitely check out the Lands Resources Consultations branch website that's on the Métis Nation of Ontario's website. We're constantly looking for citizens' involvement. That's a huge part of the Lands Resources and Consultations branch, is ensuring that the citizens are involved and that everyone in the community's voice is heard.
To make sure your voice is heard, I will leave a link to the LRC branch on the MNO's website, so you can figure out how to get involved in your region. I want to thank Taylor for ensuring our voices as Métis citizens are heard and being a really good ally to Indigenous peoples. I think it's always great to have the perspectives of our non-Indigenous friends to show more people what being a good ally looks like. It's one thing to talk the talk of supporting Indigenous peoples, but to actually walk the walk is a courageous and much needed task. It's going to take the collaboration and effort of everyone on this planet to undo the trauma and damage we've done to Mother Earth. Whether you like nuclear or hate it, make your voice heard. Educate yourself on what is happening in your home communities. Protect the bats or whatever species are endangered in your area. I hope this episode inspired you to want to get out and learn how you can start your journey in leaving behind a better world for those who will live on these lands after us. Merci for listening, and we'll see you down the river. This episode was written and directed by Samantha Loney, with music composed by Etienne Beausoleil, edited by Cassidy Villebron Baracus, and produced by the Metis and Me program, with support from our sponsors, 880 Cities and the Ontario Changemakers program, along with the Métis Nation of Ontario's Culture-Based Economic Development Grant. Make sure to like and subscribe for more episodes.